People whispered about what happened that night, but no one knew the full story. Not yet. All they knew was that a black waitress, someone everyone overlooked, did something no one else dared. She stepped between a group of aggressive officers and a billionaire CEO who looked nothing like he belonged in her small-town diner. And for a moment, the world seemed to freeze around her. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his power. She just saw a man on the ground, confused, breathless, with badges closing in on him as if they had already chosen a story for him. And something inside her refused to let that story unfold. People still ask why she did it. Why she risked her job, her safety, and her reputation for a stranger who didn't even look like he belonged at her counter. But the real mystery isn't why she defended him. It's what happened the next morning. When the billionaire walked back into her diner, not as a customer, but as something that would change her entire world forever. And the question is, how much can one act of courage truly rewrite a life? Before we begin, I'm curious. Which city or country are you watching from? Before that unforgettable night, Avery Johnson lived a life so ordinary that most people in her town barely remembered her name. Only her smile, her apron, and the steady rhythm of her steps across the old diner floor. She worked the morning shift, the night shift, sometimes both, filling coffee cups and clearing tables for people who rarely looked up long enough to thank her. It wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable. And predictability, she had learned, was its own kind of safety. The diner had become her world. Scratched countertops, buzzing neon lights, and the scent of frying bacon that clung to her clothes no matter how many times she washed them. Regulars came and went, each carrying their own assumptions. Some were kind. Some were dismissive. Others barely acknowledged her existence. In a town where people's opinions were older than the buildings, a black waitress was expected to stay in her place. Avery understood that. She'd grown used to being invisible when she wanted to be, and too visible when she didn't. Still, there was comfort in the routine. She'd open before sunrise, wipe the condensation from the windows, and watch the quiet streets slowly come alive. She liked those early moments. The calm before the noise, before the demands, before the eyes that scanned her as if searching for flaws. Avery had dreams, ones she rarely admitted aloud. A small catering business someday. Maybe a bakery with her name on the window. But dreams were fragile things here, easily questioned, often dismissed. So she kept them tucked close to her chest, whispered only in the silence of her tiny apartment. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was steady. At least, it was steady until that week. When something in the air felt different. She couldn't explain it, but she sensed it, a heaviness, a shift, as if the universe was holding its breath. Customers argued more. Police cruisers passed by more often than usual, lingering where they didn't need to. Conversations grew sharper, quicker to spark. Avery watched these things quietly, the way people like her always had to. Careful not to seem alarmed, careful not to seem bothered, careful not to draw the wrong attention. She didn't know it yet, but her life was inching toward a collision she could never have prepared for. A moment that would push her into the center of a scene she never asked to be part of. Because on the night she stepped outside for what she thought would be a normal break, someone important, someone powerful, was about to stumble into her world. And nothing about her steady life would survive what came next. Avery stepped out behind the diner that night, pulling in a breath of cold air to clear her mind. The street was calm at first glance. Quiet, still, the kind of silence that usually signaled nothing more than the slow end of another long shift. But something felt off. A sharpness in the air. A weight pressing down on the edges of her awareness. She scanned the dimly lit parking lot, expecting to see the same old pattern. An empty street, a flickering lamp, and the distant hum of passing cars. Instead, her eyes caught the slow approach of a sleek black SUV rolling to a stop near the dumpster. Its windows were tinted, too dark to see through, and too intentional for a town where vehicles like that were rare. Avery felt her stomach tighten. She knew this wasn't normal. Before she could fully process it, the diner's front bell chimed faintly from inside. A reminder that she was still on the clock. She turned to go back in, but the SUV door opened with a sudden jerk, and a man stumbled out. Expensive suit, loosened tie, blood on his cheek. An image completely out of place under the diner's dying neon lights. He looked lost, breathless, as if he'd been running from something invisible and relentless. Avery froze. Moments later, the sharp glare of police headlights sliced through the street. Two cruisers stopped so abruptly that the tires screeched, echoing against the alley walls. Officers jumped out as if pursuing a violent criminal. Their urgency didn't match the disoriented, injured man standing unsteadily in front of her. Something wasn't right. Their posture, their speed, the way they spread out. It all felt rehearsed, predetermined. Avery stepped toward the man without fully understanding why. The officers advanced faster than she expected. Their voices cut through the night in harsh tones, their movements quick, authoritative, and final. The man lifted his hands, confused and shaking, but Avery's heart pounded at the sight. Not because he looked dangerous, but because of how quickly the officers seemed ready to decide he was. Everything happened at once. The man swayed, nearly collapsing against the dumpster. Avery reacted on instinct, reaching him just as the officers moved in. She felt their eyes on her. Sharp, suspicious, and almost irritated by her presence. She wasn't part of their script. She wasn't supposed to interfere. But something in her refused to step aside. She couldn't explain the feeling, only that it anchored itself deep inside her chest. Then came a moment that shifted everything. One of the officers reached for his holster. Avery's pulse spiked. Fear surged through her so fast it felt electric. She didn't know this man. She didn't know why he was here. But she did know what fear looked like in someone's eyes, and the billionaire, though she still had no idea who he was, held that same fear. He looked like a man who had already been judged before anyone asked him a single question. The officers surrounded them, forming a wall of uniforms and flashing lights. The cold glow reflected off their badges, turning the small alley into a tension-filled stage. Avery could hear her own breath, uneven and loud, as she positioned herself between the injured stranger and the advancing officers. The moment stretched thin, fragile, and ready to snap. Her mind raced. Not with strategy, but with instinct. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her lungs. She knew the risks. People like her didn't get the benefit of mistakes. But stepping aside meant something irreversible might happen right in front of her, something she would carry forever. A truck passed on the main road, breaking the silence for a brief moment. It didn't slow down. Didn't stop. Didn't notice. The world felt narrowed to this alley. The trembling man, the rigid officers, and the neon diner sign flickering above her like a weak heartbeat. Avery sensed the shift again, the same unease she'd felt all week. But now it was sharper, clearer. Something bigger was unfolding. Something she didn't have a name for yet. One of the officers stepped forward, posture stiff, hands still near his holster. Another signaled to move in. Avery felt the energy tighten like a rope being pulled. The man behind her braced himself against the wall, too exhausted to speak, too scared to stand on his own. And then, just as the officers advanced another step, the diner door swung open behind them. Someone shouted from inside, startled by the flashing lights and aggressive movement. Heads turned for a split second, just long enough for the tension to tremble instead of snap. That brief distraction was everything. Avery took a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, but the fear didn't fade. This moment wasn't over. This confrontation wasn't finished. Because now, the officers weren't just focused on the injured man. They were focused on her. And deep down, Avery understood one chilling truth. She had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The night was about to unravel into something far larger, far darker, than she could imagine. If you're hooked so far, hit subscribe and don't miss what happens next. Lights reflected violently off metal badges and the slick black SUV. The alley felt smaller now. A cage closing in around Avery, the trembling man, and those officers. The air pulsed with tension, each breath a countdown. For a moment, the world slowed, the officers' boots scraping concrete, the harsh glow of headlights, and the distant hum of diner neon flickering overhead. All framing what could be a disaster. One of the officers took a step forward. His hand hovered over his holster, fingers curled tight. The man backed away, panic in his eyes, every instinct screaming for mercy. Avery's heart hammered so loudly she was sure they could hear it too. In a heartbeat, she realized, if she moved wrong, if the man flinched, it might be the last thing he did. She stood, frozen. Time stretched thin. Without warning, the officer barked orders. A sharp command slicing through the silence. The man raised his hands slowly, hands shaking, unsteady. The world closed in. Avery felt the concrete press beneath her shoes, the cold air tighten around her lungs. She had nothing. No proof. No protection. Just a gut feeling, a pulse of courage she didn't know she still had. Then, a sudden, horrifying motion. The officer's hand tightened on his holster as if ready to draw. In that moment, Avery saw the fear on the man's face. Raw, pleading. And she knew what might happen next. Not in theory. Not in news footage. In real life. Right here. With her. Heart pounding, she stepped in. A single movement. Tiny, but deliberate. She placed herself between the man and the officers. Her body rigid, her voice silent, but her presence loud. The officers hesitated. For a fraction of a second, everything froze. And then, a shotgun blast of adrenaline. A second officer stepped forward, little more than a blur, and grabbed the man. Not gently. Rough. Forceful. But still he didn't resist. Too afraid to move. He barely looked like the suited figure who had staggered out of the SUV. Now he was curled up against the wall, the taste of fear thick in the air. The officers moved faster now, demanding compliance, breathing commands. One drifted close to Avery, eyes flitting over her face, narrowing. Suspicion. Hostility. The question hung in the air like a threat. Why was she there? Who was she to interfere? Avery held her ground. Somewhere in her chest, an ember of anger ignited. Cold, steady, resolute. She didn't speak. She didn't yell. She didn't protest with words. She simply stood. And in that standing, she became louder than any command. Time snapped back. The officers shoved the man forward. He stumbled, barely able to hold himself upright. A cruiser door slammed. Final. Their voices rang out in stiff authority. Move now. The man looked at Avery. His eyes were wide and haunted. She caught the unspoken question there. Why? Why did she risk this for me? She couldn't answer. Not with words. Not then. With a harsh shove, they dragged him toward the black SUV. Avery watched him go. Ankles unsteady, dignity battered, fear etched into every line of his face. The SUV's engine roared to life. Lights cut through the night. Sirens began, distant but growing. Avery remained where she stood, inside that cage of headlights and uniforms. Her breath came hard, her limbs trembling but alive. The alley felt too quiet now. Too empty. Then, the SUV rolled away, sirens trailing behind like ghosts. The officers lingered a second, scanning the dim corner as if expecting someone else to appear. Their eyes met Avery's for the briefest of moments. Recognition. Or is it a warning? It flickered. Then they turned and left too. Silence settled like dust. The neon sign buzzed. The dumpster sagged against the wall. The streetlights above continued their weak vigil. Avery's world spun slow and cold. She realized, in that moment, that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. And yet, the night had shifted. Something inside her had changed. Because by stepping forward, she had already crossed into a new reality. A reality where one small act of courage could echo far louder than fear. Would simply being human be enough to challenge a world built on judgment? The next morning, the diner felt strangely bright, as if the night had never happened. Plates clattered. Coffee steamed. Regulars filled their usual seats. But for Avery, nothing felt familiar anymore. The air seemed heavier, the shadows sharper, and every sound carried the faint echo of flashing lights and raised tensions. She moved through the diner on instinct, her body performing the tasks her mind wasn't fully present for. Behind every smile she offered, the memory of the previous night pulsed like a bruise she couldn't hide. She kept replaying the moment she stepped forward, the uncertainty, and the fear. A part of her wondered if she should have stayed quiet, stayed invisible, and stayed safe. But deep down, she knew the truth. Safety had never been promised to people like her. Silence had never been protection. She had stepped forward because doing nothing would have broken something inside her that she wasn't willing to sacrifice. And then the bell above the door chimed. The diner fell into an uncanny hush, like the room inhaled all at once. Avery turned, her breath pausing in her throat. The man from the night before stepped inside. But not as the disoriented, frightened figure she had protected. He stood tall now, composed, wearing a suit that seemed more suited for boardrooms than small-town diners. Behind him, 2 staff members followed, holding briefcases and scanning the room with practiced eyes. The customers stared, murmuring among themselves. Avery froze, unsure of what she was supposed to feel. Fear, confusion, relief? The man's gaze found hers immediately. No hesitation. No search. As if she were the only reason he had returned. He took a slow step forward, and for the first time, she saw recognition in his expression. Not of shared fear, but of gratitude. Deep, humbling gratitude. Wordlessly, he approached the counter, set down his briefcase, and placed a single card on the surface in front of her. Embossed, heavy, unmistakably expensive. It carried his name, his title, and the weight of a world she had never imagined touching. It was then she learnt who he truly was. Not just a man in trouble, not just a stranger, but a billionaire CEO with influence powerful enough to shift more than just the atmosphere in her diner. He didn't need to explain why he came back. The message was already clear. Her courage had not gone unnoticed. Her protection had not been forgotten. In that moment, Avery felt something unfamiliar settle inside her. Not pride exactly, but a sense of being seen. Truly seen. Not as a background worker, not as an invisible figure in an apron, but as a human being who had stepped into the line of danger because someone needed help. As the CEO left, his staff trailing behind him, the whispers grew louder. Some people stared at her with awe, others with confusion, a few with resentment. But for the first time, Avery didn't shrink under their eyes. She held her ground. Because she understood something now. One courageous moment may not rewrite the world, but it can rewrite a life. And sometimes, that is where change begins. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a reflection of countless untold moments where ordinary people faced extraordinary choices in a system that didn't always protect them. So as she returned to her work, she carried a new question. One she hoped everyone watching would carry too. If courage can come from the most unexpected places, what could happen if more people stepped forward when it mattered most?